All right, this week we have Sarah.
Okay. I don't know how long this talk is, so probably like 10 minutes.
We'll find out at the end how long it is.
Yes, that's what happens when you make presentations the morning before you get them. You know, you get to practice and learn how long they are. So, okay.
All right, I started the timer.
Okay. All right, I'm going to talk about what I've been working on lately, which is yet another parallel analysis tool. This time for build systems that use make. Okay, so, just in case you don't know what make is, you probably do, we'll refresh your memory. Make is a build system, and the developer writes a make file, like the one on the right, and this make file tells make how to build your project. Here you can see this make file doesn't actually build anything, it just echoes things for demonstration purposes. I wish I had a pointer or something. I guess the mouse works. Okay, so here, this means that the target 1 depends on the targets 2 and 4. And those must finish before you can run these lines. Okay. So these things must execute first, and these two things are allowed to run in parallel. So you can indicate to make that two things don't depend on each other by placing those dependencies in a target. And then these lines down here, these things must be run sequentially. Okay. So make can build things in parallel, and like I said, you indicate it by how you write your targets. And so here is a graph of the make file I just showed you, and 1 is the first target that make is going to try to build because it's the first target in the file, and it can build the targets 2 and 4 in parallel. And then when building 2, it must build 3 first, and then it must build this target and then this target next, okay? So you can tell make how many threads or processors to use when building your project by saying make -j and then providing a number n. Okay.
What's the significance of the colors on the edges?
Oh, okay, so the colors are just supposed to mean green means that this thing can run in parallel with something else.
Okay.
And red means it cannot. Or yeah, that's the intended.
And then the edges without weights are supposed to be.
So the weights are just meant to indicate a ordering. So 1 must happen before 2.
So like in the 2 example, there's also an edge going on without weights. That's what would be like 0.
This one?
Yeah.
Yeah, this is like 0. Yeah.
Oh.
Yes. Okay, this could have been a better image.
Yeah, I'm sorry, is the ordering of the arrows flipped? So 3 happens before 2. So the green arrow means happens before. Or sorry, depends on. Green arrow means depends on. And
Yes.
the red arrow means happens before, because 2 happens before sub 1.
Well,
no,
2
sorry. The
sub
directions
1
are the
is
same.
built as part of 2. So this
Okay.
is like a child. Suppose these graphs are confusing. They make sense to me.
I was reading the bullet wrong. So when you
Oh,
go
okay.
2, then build sub 1, so that sub 1 is a dependence of 2.
Sub 1 is a dependence of 2, but it must run
First.
sequentially. Yes. You can't build it in parallel with 3.
Could we see the make file again and generate that?
Yeah. How do I go back?
Okay, 2 depends on 3. And 2's action is to make 1 and then 5.
Yeah. So making 1 must happen before making 5, according to 2. There's make doesn't actually know, but it's assuming there's some kind of dependency between those two things. You can't do them the
Not
same
really
way.
like a dependency in the sense of like putting out your code, but 2 is not done until 1 and 5 are done. I think that's what the graph is trying to convey.
Yeah.
Right. And red means spawns is part of the work.
Red means it's not a prerequisite or a dependency. What's listed here is what make refers to as dependencies, and these are just recipes. Does that make sense? Yeah. Okay. All right. Okay.
So in that particular example, one will actually happen twice, right?
So sub one is actually a target by the same name that's in a different directory.
Got it. Okay.
So that's why it's, yeah. So you can have, like, your build system might have a make file, and then it has many more directories that have their own make files, and your make file is organizing that somehow by doing the submake commands. So, okay. So you can do a lot of stuff with make. Okay, so how can we analyze the parallelism in this make file? So make tells us what can execute in parallel because it was listed as a dependency for the target, which means we can do those things at the same time. And it says what must run sequentially because we would have listed those things as recipes, which means they must happen in order that the developer specifies. So the parallel analysis tool builds a graph like the one I showed you, and then uses classic parallelism work span analysis to analyze the parallelism in the build system. So work is the total time to execute the entire build sequentially. So if you had one core doing the build, work is how long it would take to do it. And span is the longest time to execute any path through the graph, which means if you had an infinite number of processors, span is how long it would take to execute your build in parallel. Does that make sense, everyone? Okay. So now I'll just briefly mention other tools that have done this work. So maybe you guys have heard of Silk, which is a multi-threaded language built on top of C. And the people who made Silk produced two different tools over the years that analyzed the parallelism in Silk programs. The first was Silk View, which analyzed a whole program parallelism by doing the work span analysis that I just described. So they analyzed the logical dependencies in your Silk program, and then they calculated work and span for the program, which then they can use to give you information about the parallelism in your program. And then SilkProf came later, and instead of doing work span analysis for the entire program, they did it for each call site in the program. So they could give you much more detailed information about your Silk program. And they use this tool to take poorly performing parallel programs and suggest to the developer, you should go look at this call site in your program, and maybe you can make a change that'll improve the parallelism. So that's what that tool does. So, and there have been many other tools that did parallel analysis. I'm just not going to mention them because So. And both of these were implemented using compiler instrumentation. So they modified, I think, LLVM, which would add some kind of instrumentation to your Silk program, and then you would run the Silk program and it would gather information while it was running. Okay. So the tool that I've been building, which is doing this kind of work for make builds. So it builds a graph representing the targets, which are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and sub 1. And then it also gathers the time it took to run each of these sequentially. And so that's what these 1s weights on these edges are. So in this fake build, everything took 1 second to execute. And so we will then calculate work using this information. And so here, work is 6 seconds, because that's just the sum of all the edges in this graph. And then And then we calculate span, which here is 5 seconds because we can do almost nothing in parallel in this terrible build system. And so one example of something you can learn with this is parallelism, which is, I think, has many definitions. One of which is, this is the maximum speed up you can get using infinitely many processors if you were to run your system. So if we used 10 processors, we could get a maximum 1.2 speed up, which is terrible. So there's really no point to run this specific build on more than one thread. You're not gonna gain much. Okay, so the information we needed to build this graph was, we needed timing information for every target in our build system, and we need dependency information as well. So what can execute in parallel and what can execute sequentially. So to collect this information, instead of doing the compiler instrumentation thing that I just mentioned, I do a post-mortem analysis, which means that make will print out lots of debugging information if you run it with the right flags and do some other stuff. And so I take that output from the build and I parse it to determine what the build graph looks like, what the dependencies are, and also how long it took to build each target in the graph. So doing this post-mortem analysis, I can build a graph and then calculate work and span and stuff. Okay. So, so what can we do with this graph that we've built? So we can learn what the potential parallelism of a project is, which is, like I said, the maximum speed up you can get running using infinitely many cores. We could also predict the build time. If we had like 10 cores, we could predict how long that would take. We could also identify which targets in the make contribute to span, which is the length of time it will at least take to build your project using infinitely many cores. So we could identify those targets and suggest to the developer, you might want to go look at these and see if you can rearrange your dependencies to make things run more in parallel. And I think that would also be the definition of a bottleneck. So this is some of the stuff we could do with this information, which is similar to what previous projects have done for normal parallel programs, is suggest this to the developer. This parallel analysis is part of a much larger project, analyzing parallelism and compilation. And so, but one thing about this is that we are analyzing parallelism on a much larger scale than just a single program. So that's partly what makes this work differently than the Silk view or the Silk prop work that I mentioned. And one of the goals is to fully exploit parallelism in the compilation process at all scales, where obviously your build is one of the scales of your compilation process. And also, we want to analyze the current state of parallelism in builds that use make specifically. There are obviously other ways you can build a project, but make is pretty ubiquitous. And we want to discover if there's more exploitable parallelism in these builds. Hopefully this tool will let us do that, and also maybe will let us find ways to expose more parallelism in these builds. So, yep. I mean, a lot of this stuff I have not done yet. I'm still on the building the tool part. Make files are very gross and difficult to deal with. So, yeah, that is all I have. Are there any questions?
So when you're collecting these statistics, do you actually need to run all the commands in make, or does it suffice to just do like a dry run that will analyze all the dependencies and then use that info?
I think a dry run might be sufficient to determine all of the dependencies, but it won't give you timing information.
Oh, right.
So you want the timing information, so you do have to run the entire build which I don't think is too much of a burden because you were going to build your project anyway.
Also, you have edges that won't be revealed in a dry run
Oh, yeah.
Because of the nested
because of the recursive make. All the calls to make as actions.
Those are not shown in a dry run.
The dry run just isn't going to run any actions,
Okay.
even
Recipes.
recursive make calls.
I think they're called recipes, right?
Yeah.
I haven't actually looked at dry run output, so I've only looked at the output from a full run of make.
Well, I'm convinced that's a bad idea. Go on.
Okay, yeah, so. Yeah.
Could we go back to the graph?
Oh, yeah.
So it's slightly unintuitive to compute critical path on this graph representation.
Yeah.
Because, so let's see, the two recipes within the task 2 each take 1 second.
Yeah.
So the total length of that task is 2 seconds.
Yes.
Right. So
So
the
are
critical
you?
path will not literally be a path through this.
No. So that's just a phrase used by the literature, you know, is to call something a critical
Okay.
path. So there's some textbook that I think is cited in a lot of these papers where they're like, you know, we're talking about work span, and they cite this textbook which explains these like parallel ideas like work and span and stuff, and they have this like really ugly graph that has like, I think might actually be a path, and it's really gross in my opinion and confusing.
This is it one of the silk ones? They have some weird looking graphs in the silk ones.
No, it's not a silk one, it's a textbook. I have a printout of it, but I don't remember the name of it. This is the, here, I'll show you. It's, they like,
Yeah, those are the ones. Those are the ones that some people like to use as well.
yeah, they're really gross.
Well, because
I think they're confusing.
you're trying to combine these two different notions of like function calls and tasks, and it gets messy.
Yeah, so I think some of these are regular function calls, yeah, and others are where they're spawning a
Right.
report.
Right.
Yeah, so,
I do think those get confusing, but I think this is also confusing in
Oh.
some way.
okay.
So I kind of wonder.
Improve that.
Well, I kind of wonder as a graphical notation whether, like for this one, if you expanded it to represent the sort of more hierarchical thing that's going on here, a task that has either one recipe or an unbounded number of recipes but which makes no recursive calls to make can be viewed as atomic.
That would, yeah, so like two, if two did other things that weren't recursive make calls, those wouldn't show up on the graph.
Sure, they wouldn't need to.
Yeah.
But in this scenario here, where two has two recipes, this is very hard to say. But where two has two recipes, two could have up to 4 nodes. It could have 2 start, 2 recipe 1, 2 recipe 2, 2 finish, let's say.
Okay.
And then if you only want to have one kind of dependence edge in the universe, 2 cannot start until its dependency 3 is met. So there's a dependence there. And then there's an additional dependence to the first recipe, because that's the recursive call to make. And actually the second recipe has no recursive call to make, right? Or did it? Forgot.
Which one?
5?
No,
I guess
5
it-
doesn't do anything interesting.
Yeah. Well, I guess
So-
I just want to argue for a graphical kind of edge.
But
Okay.
it really feels like two kinds of edges. There are genuinely different things here.
I think part of it is that this graph representation makes sense inside the computer, and it's more confusing when displayed. Because
No, I find it helpful if you ordered this so that 3 and 4 were switched on the screen so that it went 2, 4, 3, then it would, then the program would sort of move left to right.
I mean, would it be less confusing if there was like an edge from 3 to sub 1? Some kind of like a fake edge or something? I don't know. Like there is an ordering here, but it's hard to describe it because
Yeah, the
3
order is
doesn't actually
implicit
have
in-
anything to do with sub 1.
The sort of operational semantics for this graphical language is do your green edges and then do your red edges in order.
Yes, that is the Operational semantics.
Yeah.
Maybe just a little key.
It's fine, it means the same thing.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, I think but I do think the difference between the green edges and the red edges is a real difference here.
What's the black arrow?
That is just the Inkscape wasn't cooperating. That doesn't mean anything, I'm sorry. I kept clicking on it to make it green and then it would just change one of the other edges. It was, I don't know, so, free software, so, yeah.
Move one thing over and turn it off and it just breaks.
Hearing Ryan try to describe these, it may be nice to pick names that aren't 1, 2, and 3.
I think maybe A, B, and C
Oh.
would actually have worked significantly better.
Oh, but here's the funny thing about it. So these should all be technically marked phony, right? So I think this might be a slightly
Why?
offending.
Was
So
it?
dot phony, colon, names of targets that do not actually produce files. And none of those actually produce a file, and the name of the target
yeah.
is named
Do
after.
you have to, you don't
You know,
have to
you
say
don't
dot
have to
phony.
do that, and
You don't
everyone
have
who's
to.
I thought we had that
I think it's
adventure.
optional.
That was sort of,
it's definitely optional, and
Because this
Most people
makefile,
don't do
I
it.
ran this makefile on my computer. Like it does stuff.
Yeah.
oh, it really does that.
So
Yes.
It's just
that
phony.
phony prevents if someone puts like one file in that directory, it
Uh-huh.
prevents that row from not running. So like if you've got a directory with a make file
Oh,
and
okay.
there's a clean file in the
So
directory.
you're saying
and you
dot
call
phony
make
would
clean,
tell it to run it every time?
Yeah, because you're basically just using it as like a shorthand or a command.
yes.
But can we go back to makefile? So one consequence of phony targets is I think, okay, with phony targets, if two of them depend on the first target, then it only executes once. If you have multiple dependencies that all go to 1 or A or whatever it is, it will only execute once. But if you have a recursive make call, it should execute again, won't it? So in this particular case, if you got rid of CD sub, just that change, I think it echoes hello 1 twice. True or false?
Yeah, I think you're right.
I don't.
Whereas if you just added an extra
Wait,
dependency,
that would be a
like,
cycle
That would be an
though.
infinite
What would
loop.
make
Yeah.
do in that case?
Oh,
I'm not
yeah.
sure.
Oh, you're right, okay.
That would be a cycle. It
That would be a
would,
cycle.
it would echo one.
I don't
A
know
lot
what
of
make would do.
So the
Actually,
question
it
is-
would never echo one now that if you continue this logic.
Oh, I see what you're saying, yeah, 0
Oh,
times.
yeah. I would do 2.
Well, anyway, so this is a bad example. But, okay,
But you thoroughly decipher this.
make a simpler one. But yeah, that does mean that there's this weird difference between the recursive calls to make and the regular dependencies, where, especially with phony targets, I think one will result in repeated executions and the other will not. Because even with phony targets, you have sort of deduplication of, like if there's multiple ways to reach it in the dependence graph, that doesn't mean it happens twice, I think.
Yeah, I think, well, in my minimal experience trying to parse the output of make, specifically the OCaml make file that I was complaining about, if you do like, the top level make thing and it does like a recursive make and then later on it does the exact same recursive make again for some reason, and make determines that it doesn't need to rebuild those things. And I'm pretty sure that was a phony target.
Does that require any communication between the two levels of make, or is that just that it's looking at the file system and it sees that it doesn't need to do anything?
I think in that case, the dependencies were actual files, and so it just checks the timestamps
Yeah, so
and determines it doesn't need to do
I
anything.
think you're right that invoking recursive make is different than using a dependency. Sort of unsurprising, like recursive make makes parallelism harder for exactly the same reason, because you have to execute all those red edges sequentially.
Testing this. You make it weird. Yeah. Those recursive makes should just be like regular system shell calls that have nothing to do with it.
Right.
Any entanglement between the two is weird.
I agree.
So, because I have a silly question here. So what is, so is dollar sign fifty to make, a recursive call to make, or that could be anything you want?
It's a recursive call to make, but it's different than saying just lowercase make. And I think it tells make to do like some special stuff, like to ignore flags and things, but I'm not sure on the details of exactly what it does.
I believe it allows make, if there's some flags being passed to make, it passes them along, so that if you set some variables or you're using make -j, then it uses the same job server for all the calls to make -j, so that everything.
Oh yeah, this lets you set the make variable to be some scripts too.
Huh. So by the way, I confirm the hypothesis that if you, so this is a question of the difference in semantics between food colon bar and food colon recipe make bar.
Mm-hmm.
So like those seem similar in that they both only invoke bar.
I
They
think
are different in at least this way.
in what way?
One of them, so I made a little diamond
Mm-hmm.
where D depends on B and C and B and C depend on A. So they're all phony, none of them touch files.
D depends on B and C
Sorry, a diamond that goes A, B, C, D.
okay.
So D is at last, it depends on B and C.
Uh-huh.
B and C depend on A.
Yep.
So there's sort of two different paths that depend on
Uh-huh.
A. So if you do that, then you do make D, you only get A to fire once.
Okay.
But if B and C shift A from proper dependencies to something they call via recursive make, then A prints twice. A fires twice.
Yeah, because it builds the dependency graph. I mean, it tracks the job server and the various other things that the page that Sarah has brought up across calls to recursive make, but it does not share the dependency graph computation and thus deduplication across calls to recursive make. Which is part of why. So, like what Ryan just said is that if you make multiple calls to recursive make, it does not gather up all the dependency information from those recursive calls, build one giant dependency graph, and then run it. But it does communicate some information from the top level to the sub invocations, which is what this is saying.
But it's tricky because if you throw the model off, you could have sort of exponential differences in work between. So you construct a dependence graph.
Where if you change the red edges to green edges, it's totally different. Yes.
Yes. Although even with the red edges, if a red edge, if a node hanging off a red edge has a green edge, that's sort of funny because it's saying that this recursive job depends on a task, but you're not going to get the noization duplication magic for that green edge.
The memo is the dependency tracking happens in all green subgraphs.
Okay, so if you go red and the green edge, yes.
Yeah.
So you're saying,
Could these graph, the make file that I just wrote that executes A twice, if A was a ton of work, A just happened twice. Can that be represented in this graph?
Yeah, I think Sarah's tool will show two circles for A.
yeah, so if you had one target that did the same work twice for some reason, it would have two edges to the work and it would have the times for both of them.
So your work estimate is always accurate by fiat because you get it from the make file log. So if make chooses to run it twice, it will generate two nodes under your system.
it will generate one node, but it'll generate more than one edge. So it'll generate an edge for each time it did the work.
There's never any nodes with duplicate labels, in other words?
There should not be.
Okay.
Yeah. There should only be one node, and then if you do the same work 10 times, you should have 10 edges to that node. Each with whatever time it took to do that specific work.
But it is confusing because if it actually produced a file, then re-execution would be suppressed even across nested calls and make. So the actual amount of work would be different. If it
Yeah,
produced
so if you built a file and it took 10 seconds, you have an edge that says, I built this file and it took 10 seconds, and then you check it again, there would be another edge, but it might say 0 seconds. Does that make sense?
Okay.
Yeah.
I see.
That's the goal, at least.
So this is actually a cool feature of the way that you've decided to track the work that Make is doing. And instead of parsing and trying to figure out the semantics on your own, you're just using its precise semantics.
I don't know if I'd call them semantics because
Makes implementation. You're using
I am more like looking at the output from a specific make system and saying, okay, this obviously is what's going on. And then, you just run another make system and they do like slightly other weird things and then it breaks everything because your interpretation or my interpretation was slightly wrong. So it's like, I wish I had semantics for what make was doing. It's just kind of like guessing, I guess.
Reverse engineered semantics.
Yeah, yes, I'm reverse engineering what make is doing based on the plain English they print when doing debugging. The output is all in plain English. It's like, we just considered this target. It's like, okay, so clearly they just considered this target. Yeah, so that's, yes, it's very scientific.
Yeah, thanks.